Cole. First thing I want to thank all the technology. Record that so we can put it up on the website. I'm Bob Elliott. I'm the Environmental Leaders Learning Alliance host this evening. And as I think all of you know, the LS is known as sponsored by Teatown and also by the Federated Conservations of the Westchester. I thought tonight, just do a real quick introduction to these guys. We're very grateful for coming. I think if you're here, you know that we have a huge invasive plant problem. I'll tell you that. And I think we've assembled a terrific panel to educate us a little bit about it. So probably already know these guys over. I did put some donuts and some cider from a local farm. I got that from Thompson Cider down the street, but closed during the week. But it's a wonderful place to visit in Parkside. But I thought I'd just do some brief introductions, have each of these guys give a relatively short presentation and see if we can get into a good conversation. So to start with, we have Brent Boscarino on the end there. He joined the New York, New Jersey Trails Conference in 2019 as an invasive species citizen science program coordinator. And prior to that, he was with Poughkeepsie Day School, and previous to that, Harvey School right up the road there. Brent ran a multiple invasive species-based research projects in collaboration with Hobart and William Smith. I think in Bard colleges, he received his undergraduate degree in Middlebury and a PhD in natural resources from Cornell. Like all of these guys, he's an outdoor enthusiast. Adam Lippman. Adam joined the Westchester Parks Foundation in March 2020 as a volunteer coordinator. Originally from a marketing and design background, Adam's love for nature, backpacking, and volunteering on the Appalachian Trail led him to a more rewarding path. Admire him for that, of conservation advocacy and sharing his passion for volunteering. Bob DelTorto is president of the Bronx River Parkway Conservancy, an organization organized in 1997 to emphasize the historical importance of Parkway Reservation and the county system's first park. And Adam Middlebrook, stewardship director of North Salem Open Land Foundation. For the past 4 years, over the decade, he's worked for the Connecticut Department of Energy and Environment Protection as a park ranger and Westchester County Parks and their Conservation Division. Like the others, he's an outdoor person. So I think if we start down the end there with Brent.
Sure. We're going to get up our presentation here, but yes, I'm Brent. It's nice to meet everybody, and thanks for coming out tonight. Really appreciate it. I'm going to do sort of a general overview. I am the coordinator for what's called the Lower Hudson PRISM, or Partnership for Regional Invasive Species Management. So this is and I'll show it on a couple of slides in a bit. But this is essentially a partnership between local organizations, nonprofits that all come together over a combined interest in invasive species and the threat that they pose to our natural areas and our parks. So I'm going to go over just a general overview. I work for the New York, New Jersey Trail Conference. You guys may be familiar with a bit of our work, but we have over a 100-year history, just celebrated our centennial a few years ago, and we have lots of volunteers. The vast majority of our volunteers at the Trail Conference are trail maintainers. So like getting out there, making sure that the corridor is free for people to explore and enjoy nature. We love what we do, and we would be nowhere for our volunteer base. So the vast majority of our volunteers are out there working hard to, create trail tread, dedicate lots of hours, over 100,000 hours annually for our parks. We do lots of trail maintenance. A lot of our history was really based in the Appalachian Trail, but started to do long distance trails very recently, and have that connectivity where people can explore nature in ways that are safe and through responsible use. Next slide. So again, historically, the Trail Conference has focused on developing and building and maintaining trails, a little bit of support and advocacy work, and education and outreach, but it's really until recently, around 2012, that we started getting our hands in ecological stewardship work. And that came about when these entities called PRISMs started to be created by New York State DEC. And that's when the Trail Conference took over this contract, which I'll explain in a little bit, to coordinate the regional response to invasive species. Land managers, across the Lower Hudson Valley in northern New Jersey where we work, have been doing this kind of on their own. This allowed the flexibility and framework for us to start communicating, coordinating, sharing ideas, things that were working, not working, and prioritizing an action plan for the region having invasive species. Next slide. Before we get into it in more detail, let's just take a step back and talk about what we actually mean by invasive species. So again, an invasive species means that it's introduced to an area by humans. So we're not talking about natural migration. We're not talking about monarchs flying from Mexico up to the northeast habitats, right? These are something that is either hitchhiking on boats, oftentimes coming from Europe or Asia and coming into ports and then gaining access that way. Sometimes it's introduced on purpose. So a lot of the ones that we're dealing with in our parks right now are ornamentals. They're pretty in some way. They have really bright berries and they're very showy and displayed. You want to put them in the properties, and you'll see what ends up happening when they escape. They start taking over our natural areas. So invasive species are those that are called non-native, introduced by humans to an area in which there's no evolutionary mechanism to deal with that. There's no natural predators. They sort of like have a competitive advantage and they sort of take over an area. So just because something is non-native doesn't necessarily make it invasive. It really has to cause either a large economic impact, but typically like an environmental impact in some way, influencing native biodiversity, the number and type of species that naturally existed here prior to that organism. Does that make sense? So invasive means, kind of is really aggressive, threatens local biodiversity. Next slide. This is not just a local issue. This is, in the United States in particular, this is probably the largest threat to biodiversity is our invasive species problem. And when we talk about invasive species, we're going to be talking a lot about plants today, but we are increasingly dealing with forest pests. So you may have heard of the hemlock woolly adelphid and seen what's happened to our hemlock trees. Emerald ash borer, if you look at the ashes around here, almost every single ash tree has succumbed to this bug that has infiltrated our system here and has killed out ash trees. So it's a really large threat. It's especially on island nations. I mean, invasive species can really take over there, and it's a primary driver of species extinction. And they crowd out native species. Next slide. As to how they spread, lots of different mechanisms. So the main thing I want you all to take away from this is that in New York State, there are some regulations and restrictions in place in what you can now buy and put in your own properties. It didn't always used to be the case. The main invasive plants that you're seeing along the trails in our park systems, there was no mechanism for not selling them in nurseries. So people were planting them, talking about things like multiflora rows as hedgerows along in agriculture, or to put up in your own properties. Japanese barberry, great hedge tree for your property. Showy vine, Oriental bittersweet. This is what Bob DelTorto probably constantly works with, and porcelain berry and these things. Put on properties, they were sold in nurseries and then have escaped that wherever they were planted and are now causing these problems. And just because you see it on your own property, you're like, well, I'm taking care of it, I'm pulling it back, it's not growing or whatever. Just remember that wildlife are visiting these plants. They're eating their berries, they're then going out, pooping out those berries in natural area sites. And now you've got yourself what was contained in a pergola is now out in the system in a park where, it wasn't actually planted, it was brought there by something else. So you can see, this is like Bio 101 stuff, is how seeds can spread. But I just want to hit home the point that just because you don't see the plant on your property spreading rapidly doesn't mean that it's not getting out. So the first order is really prevention of that spread. Don't buy it, don't purchase it in the first place. Or you get a situation here, next slide, you've got this Oriental bittersweet in your property, And then all of a sudden you've got a system that we see now driving around this Conic, where you're like, can anyone tell me what that tree is? No, because it's completely covered in an invasive vine. So you can't even tell what's growing under there. Nothing else is really growing. Very few insects can actually utilize that food resource. And now you've got yourself a monoculture of a vine strangling these trees. And we'll see, it's not just about the plants, but it's the food web that it supports. Next slide. So it's well known that native plants support more diverse wildlife. Most species of native insects have adapted to eat to eat native plants, and typically really specialize on those native plants. So in evolutionary history, become specialized to find those food resources that they're really good at accessing, to give them that advantage that enabled them to survive throughout evolutionary history. And then you've got a new plant that's coming in, taking over whatever that food resource is or that critical habitat that they need. Now that resource is no longer there. That has impacts throughout trophic levels and food web. And you're having effects that's not just on the plants itself, but the food web and habitats that it supports. So the classic example of that is the monarch butterfly caterpillars adapted to only eat milkweeds. Well, what ends up happening is through habitat degradation, or you guys know what swallowwort is? So swallowwort is a dog strangling vine. It actually mimics and looks very much like a milkweed. So we have monarch butterflies that are being tricked into laying their eggs on this invasive species. The caterpillars cannot actually survive on that invasive plant. So not only is the invasive swallowwort taking over space of, say, milkweeds, but it's also mimicking it. And now monarchs can't even survive on that plant that's now coming. Next slide. So with the loss of native plants, I do need to hit home the point that it's not just native plants that are going by the wayside, but it's really the insects. The insects are what make our systems go, and our pollinators are really so critical. So I'm sure a lot of what people will talk about today is thinking about how do we bring back our pollinator populations? How do we create these little pockets in these areas that are highly invaded, or the areas that aren't invaded? How do we keep them pristine so that our pollinators continue to thrive and hit these little pathways to continue their life cycle and bring back that sort of native habitat that we're after? We've seen huge declines in insect populations over time. Next slide. And so it's not really just about, you're going to hear a lot about, we're going to pull, we do invasive vine cuttings and we pull this type of plants. And if you want to bring back that, it's not just about the plants, it's really supporting that system, that native habitat, and that whole food web and diversity of wildlife that rely on those native plants as well. All right, that was a mouthful. Maybe I'll go really quickly through our own, because these guys have a lot more to say on the issue, but I just wanted to provide an overview for everyone. Keep going. So this requires a lot of cooperation and commitment. We have those that on trail conference staff that do a lot of work. Everyone that you're seeing here is a partner of what is called this PRISM entity, which I'll describe in a little bit. We're all kind of working together and sharing priorities. We have conservation corps members, so through AmeriCorps programs that come and we have seasonal workers that come help on certain projects that we have prioritized for that year. We have a lot of state agency partners, New York State DEC, U.S. Department of Ag and Markets, New York State Department of Ag and Markets as well, and a lot of research institutions as well are partners with us. Next slide. And of course, we could not do this work. I mean, our PRISM staff through the New York State DEC contract is funding 3 staff members for a region that is the entire Lower Hudson Valley. We could not do this work without community volunteers and the power. You're going to hear like the real power of that from these 3 gentlemen here, and what a great job they've done with that. So moving on, luckily here in New York State, we have an infrastructure to bring organizations and volunteers together. And that was through what is called these partnerships for regional invasive species management. This is our jurisdiction here in the Lower Hudson, but there's one down in in Long Island. Finger Lakes, Western New York, St. Lawrence area, Adirondacks. Capital Mohawk is actually called Capital Region now, and then the Catskills. So there's 8 different cooperative partnerships where money from the Environmental Protection Fund is given towards invasive species reporting, early detection, and management. Next slide. These are the counties that the Lower Hudson PRISM services. So everything down to Manhattan, all the way up to the northern points of Dutchess and Ulster County. This is the Catskill Prison here, to that borders us to the left, and then the Capital Region to our north. Next slide. And we have, we're at like, I think, 57 regional partners now. So you're going to hear from some of them tonight. We have steering committee members that help us prioritize what projects we end up working on, lots of different participants. You can see some basic metrics there. We do a lot of invasive species removal. We train volunteers in how to identify certain invasive species that we consider high priority and we need to tackle and make management plans about, and you know, creating a prioritization plan amongst our partners. So it's a wonderful, wonderful network to be a part of. And it's really the information sharing and that sense of like community and collaboration, I think, that makes it so powerful. So I don't want to steal the show, so I'm going to pass it over to these guys to tell about the good work that they're doing with volunteers, and then we can circle back to some of our volunteer programs and be able to talk to you guys about questions you have. I'll turn it over to Adam.
All right, so while she's getting that slideshow pulled up, my name is Adam Lippman. As Bob said, I'm a volunteer coordinator with Westchester Parks Foundation. For those of you who are not familiar with us, we are a nonprofit organization. Our mission is to engage the public to advocate for and invest in the conservation, preservation, use, and enjoyment of all of the Westchester County park system specifically. So it's around 50 parks. It makes up about 18,000 acres. My team currently is just me and my manager, Mary. So we have a lot going on, but we have several different parts to our programs in our organization to sustain the organization. You may be familiar with some of the other programs, but our volunteer program specifically, we started in 2015. Since then, we've had approximately 20,000 volunteers do about 60,000 hours of volunteer service. So we work with everybody, scout groups, school groups, you know, all members of the community, local government, you know, that comes to us about issues in their local parks that the county manages. And so I'd like to talk a little bit about our invasive specific part of our program. So you can see our metrics just from this year. While invasive species plant management is not all that we do, because we do other things, trail building and maintenance, paint park buildings. We do a lot of litter cleanups. We do a lot of native tree planting, and so on. But I would have to say that invasive species management is a good half to 2/3 of that work, because even if you want to do a native tree planting and restore an area like a stream buffer, you're going to likely be going in and moving invasives first. So it kind of overlaps in a lot of what we do. But here, this is a site actually at Tibbsbrook Park where we were awarded the Trees for Tribs grant again from the DEC. So we've spent the year clearing all the invasives along this part of the brook. And we planted 231 more native trees with protection this fall. And last year it was, and actually we did another 100 in the spring, and then last year there was another 150. So you can see what, as we all know, I mean, forget about what's over there. We're just trying to focus on this area. But it's really, there's so much to manage. So this is just a little snapshot of this year. It gives you an idea of the scale of how many volunteers working just alone. We've had over 3,000 volunteers this year in our program, so half of them are working on invasives. We've run almost 100 invasive specific plant management projects this year and planted just about 700 trees. in their place through the DEC grant or through Westchester Soil Conservation District also donated a bunch of plants for us to plant at Saxon Woods to combat beech leaf disease. And then the aquatic invasive species, you're looking at water chestnut and Eurasian water milfoil. Obviously, both have an impact on the environment, but the main goal in those two cases is recreation, restoring recreation. Next slide. So again, there are 18,000 acres. Like it's just, I mean, everywhere you look, as Bob Elliott was saying, I mean, you got to really focus your efforts on where it's needed. There's a couple of reasons of why it's needed for us. With the county park system, our main priority is people's access to those parks, keeping them accessible to pathways, the rivers, the hiking trails, the biking trails, parking lots even, and then also, you know, so that they can enjoy recreation there. So again, one of the goals of the water chestnut project that we've been doing is eventually they want to restore aquatic recreation on Tibbetts Brook Lake. And then also at Wampus Pond, where we're removing the milfoil, the main reason there is because you can't even get the boats out of the boathouse because it's like storing this pot of spaghetti. So we go in there and we do as much removal as we can to at least clear a channel to maintain access for that, you know, activity at their park. So that's number one. Number two is, as I was saying earlier, well, 2 and 3 are kind of tied together. Restoration in terms of we want to restore these areas to a native state, and in the case of these riparian buffers on the streams where we're planting new tree plantings, or if it's in the forest, you know, if we don't keep on top of that, it'll grow back faster than you can possibly imagine. And to pull everything out is quite a task. So there's a lot more management than full removal being done, but you know, it's what we can do to at least keep those new areas that we've planted native things in protected and keep everything in balance as much as possible and accessible. Next slide. So we have a lot of different ways that we get volunteers. Like I was saying, we do a lot of projects with scout troops, Eagle Scout projects. A lot of the high schools have a green club. A lot of the colleges have environmental majors, and they need to get hours and credits for their programs. So they're often in touch with us, their leaders. We send them our calendar every month of activities. They put them up on their you know, school hallway walls for students looking for opportunities. We also do tabling. I was at the Greeley Community Service Expo about 2 weeks ago. We'll table at our other events like Bicycle Sundays, the Wine and Food Festival, and all of our volunteer table at our events. We'll have the table with all of our upcoming events, so you can see what else is going on and enjoy yourself. And then we also do a lot of, you know, emails, social media. We participate in the Invasive Species Awareness Weeks, whether it's national or New York. We do extra events and extra, you know, media coverage and social media coverage, just to kind of honor that and get more people to learn about it. And then we have an event called Pitchin' for Parks, which is really our biggest single volunteer period of the year, where in that week we'll be in 14 or 15 parks with 600 to 800 volunteers doing just about everything. And so there's a lot of coverage. We'll have corporate sponsors there. We have the news are there, the commissioner is there, so, and the county executive to kick it off. So that brings a lot of awareness as well. And then, you know, we try and reach out to all those groups and let them know what we're doing. Next slide. Then we also have several internships. So this is a new one that, thanks to PRISM, and if anyone saw Mary's presentation on our Zoom on a couple of days ago, this is these two interns were from communities that were underrepresented in the environmental field, and the funds come from the DEC, and this was put together by PRISM as well. And so you can see the kind of educational experience that these kids are getting. They worked with us for about a half a year. They learned all about how these kinds of programs work, how to do outreach, help us with growing our contacts, how to run an event. They ran an event by themselves with our supervision where there was media on site, and they were doing outreach to all the visitors. They learned about how to survey and map for beech leaf disease, how to use iNaturalist and map IMAP invasives, plant trees, and then, teach the volunteers kind of, we call them a volunteer site leader. Once they're trained up a bit, they can then, lead the project while we look on and guide and do a bit of teaching what they learn themselves. And so this is Mia, one of our two of the all of Westchester interns this year. Next slide. We also have our own program that we started last year. This is the second year. We call it the Green Turnship. There were so many good names that we wanted. This is actually, speaking of, we were talking about like working in all sorts of crazy weather. Last February, if you may recall, was a whole lot of snow in 2021. So there was a lot of challenges because the winter session is February and March, Saturday. So REI was nice enough to lend us 30 pairs of snowshoes. And this is at Board Found Ridge Reservation. The kids wanted to do an invasive ID walk and do some management. So we did what we could, but we have the winter program that's 8 Saturdays in February and March, and that's really sort of based on doing outreach materials, some of which you'll see on the frames over there that they created. Brent came and did a class last year for them to teach them about iNaturalist and IMAP invasives, among other things. And they did some surveys and they learned all about, the similar types of things. So between the winter and summer programs of both years, you can see a significant amount has been accomplished. And a lot of these kids, they show themselves to be natural leaders in these programs, and we bring them back and have them be volunteer site leaders in our projects. And it's just a really good relationship that we have with all the kids. Next slide. So here's some more shots. This is more from the winter program, dealing with the weather we could. And then this is, we do this at Blue Mountain Reservation and Tibbetsbrook Park in the lake, removing water chestnut. So we remove between about 50 and 60,000 pounds by hand over the course of 2 to 4 weeks each year. So it's a lot of work, but the kids love it. My kids did it with me, and it was amazing. I've never seen them work so hard and be so happy. It was great. So a couple ways that we recruit and manage our volunteers. We use Eventbrite, and then people can register there, and then we can send them all the information and post our calendar there. And then Volunteer New York, our partner, also lists all of our events as well. And then so people looking there, they send them our way and they register on our site. So that's worked out for us pretty well. And then, of course, without all of our partners, I mean, this partnership is great for all of us because, we tap into all of these resources as well. This is Croton Gorge. This is the Trail Conference's Trails team, Walt and Jane Daniels and Fred Constern, building a new trail there. Ryan McQueen, the Invasive Strike Force, he has helped us manage and size 2 more lesser celandine populations, viburnum as well. And he's a great resource. And then we also have the aquatic invasive strike force, which I believe is based out of Teatown.
It was out of Teatown, yep.
And so they'll come and bring a team out and help us in the summer with the water chestnut collection. And then they'll also we'll have them speak to all the interns, talk about, what they do and how they got those opportunities and how to get more involved in the, environmental field if you want to. So it's, without all the help and Bob with the Bronx River Parkway Reservation Conservancy, we work together each year, managing viburnum with the amazing weed wrench. And, so all these partners, it's really a very important asset to our program. Like we all help each other. So it makes it feel a little bit more manageable. And then a couple of the tools that we use, there's the weed wrench I was talking about. Loppers. For more just like keeping things under control, like we got to quickly get through an area. We know that we're not going to be able to get all the roots of some of these things. And we're just going to have to keep on top of them. And, good things to cut those down, loppers, weed whips here, shears, metal rakes. If you're doing the milfoil, it's just about getting the stuff out of the way the best you can. And those are good tools to do that. If you're really trying to and able to remove something long term, then of course you want to pull it out fully. So we'll dig things out with shovels and pickaxes, with the weed wrench here, by hand if it's something like garlic mustard or mugwort. A lot of those you can pull out by hand, but a lot of what we do is unfortunately has to just be management, because there's just so much, and you just got to keep these areas going. And whenever you can, fully pull out things for a longer term solution. We absolutely do that. And next slide. And then last but not least, now you've come to this project, you've learned about this, you've done this work. Where do you go from here besides coming to do more volunteering? On the project, we'll teach you about what you're doing, why you're doing it, a bit, similar to the kind of stuff Brent was talking about, how they can spread your boots, your bike tires, your boat, you name it. And then we'll teach them about that. We had a lot of Eagle Scout projects, so we'll be putting in more boot brush stations at all the county parks. So you'll see more of those. So we always encourage people to use those afterwards. And it's a very fun, interactive thing. And a lot of people say, I didn't even know anything about this before. And now not only are they removing them, but they're learning how to prevent the spread. And, the more they know that, and they can identify these plants, then they say, oh, in my backyard, I have a ton of this stuff. I had no idea what this was. I knew it was bad. Now I know how to get rid of it. And my neighbor, he has the same problem. So now the neighbor knows how to get rid of it, and they want to work together. And so the more that you spread this information and teach people how to do it, they're going to take it to others. So we just hope to continue that knowledge. Thanks for listening.
Sorry, I missed the last sentence. You said, what are you going to do behind it?
Yeah, so you might have seen the picture on Brent's presentation of the boot that was in like a scrubber.
Yeah.
It's just it's two little brushes. Imagine like those wire brushes, facing each other with just enough room for your shoe. And when you get off the trail, you put your shoes through there, and it'll get all the seeds off and things so you don't track them to the next park that you go to that didn't have that, and now you've just brought it there.
It's all about risk mitigation. So, it's not going to get every seed, but like not every seed is going to be viable either. So the more you can stop it from spreading, the less likely it will be to take hold, right? So, and it's at very minimum, it's a good educational tool. So they usually come with these signs and things, so that people are not only doing the physical, wiping of their boots, but also like reading at the same time. So
thanks, Brent. Thanks, Ed. Let's get here from Bob and Andrew, and then we'll open it up to conversation.
After these two guys presented, I don't have a heck of a lot to say, but so I'm going to say a bunch of things, and I'm going to save some for Andrew. But I'm the president of the Bronx River Parkway Reservation Conservancy. We call it the little group with a really long name. We've been in business since 1997. It started as a historical preservation group, but we've morphed into doing less of that and more environmental stuff. So in 2003, we started a vine cutting group on the Bronx River, and whereas Adam and I, we're both working towards the same thing. My group does it on a much smaller scale, whereas Adam is working in all of the county parks, 50 of them, with 18,000 acres. I work in the Bronx River Reservation, which was the first of the county's parks, the first of the 50 county parks. was dedicated, I believe, in 1925. And it's 807 acres. What's unique about it, in addition to it having a river running through it, which terminates in the East River, which eventually goes to the Long Island Sound, is that it has a parkway that runs through it. In fact, they coined the name Parkway. It was, and there is some who will argue against it, but it was the first parkway in the United States. And it basically was a roadway that went through a park. Okay. Anyway, our focus is a little narrower. We run a vine cutter group, and I think I mentioned it started in 2003. And basically, what we're all about is cutting vines, saving trees. We do a little bit more than that now. We're starting to actually plant in some of the areas where we've saved the trees. I started in the parks in 1975. And the first job was picking up the garbage at Glen Island Park in New Rochelle. And invasive species were not on anybody's radar at that point. And there's a term that we use in the business when we educate, when we do a class, we talk about sleep, creep, and then leap. And that's what the invasive plants did. A lot of them have been here for a long time. Places like NYPG would go out into the world and say, oh my God, we don't have this in our garden. Let's bring it home, right? So they went to all ends of the earth, brought exotic things for places like NYPG, and then it escaped cultivation. So for years, for decades, this stuff slept, right? And then it started to creep. And now it's at the point where it's leaping. So we call it sleep, creep, and leap. Easy to remember. A lot of what needs to happen, because, you know, I think the title of this panel discussion is, what can you do about invasives? A lot of it hinges on education. You know, like Adam said before, he's had people come into his program and then they say, oh my God, I didn't realize what that was. And that it was maybe a problem. So you'll find these invasives mainly in minimally managed areas, and those are usually public lands. So getting back to my point about 40 years ago when I started in the parks, we were basically mowing lawns, picking up litter, keeping the park pretty, painting everything that needed to be painted. But there was nobody doing any invasive species removal. I don't even know if the term existed at that point. So basically on the Bronx River, what we're trying to do is save trees. And we go out we usually don't do it in the summer because of ticks and mosquitoes and poison ivy. But we're out there every other Sunday from October until the middle of April for a couple of hours. And we're all volunteers. I'm a volunteer. Everybody in my program is a volunteer. Any monies that we raise goes towards tools and programs and education, paying for our insurance, things like that. And we've saved, let me see, we used to start down in the Bronx River Reservation touches upon 13 different municipalities. That's the really unique thing about it. Not that it has a river running through it, not that there's a parkway and that there's 807 acres of parkland. It's that there's 13 different municipalities that you have to deal with. Most of the parks, I mean, Tibbetsbrook Park is in Yonkers. So if you have an issue, you call City Hall. In New Rochelle, you've got Glen Island, right? If you've got an issue with the city, you call City Hall. we have to call a lot of people if we have a concern. But as much as that's a problem, it's also a benefit, because if you've got an issue that affects the river, you can get 13 different groups, municipal groups, to pounce on that. Years ago, the watershed committee was much more organized than it is today. We used to have meetings probably on a quarterly basis at the county center, and representatives from all the environmental groups, in addition to the municipalities, would come to these meetings and they say, well, we're doing this, and wow, that's a good idea, we should do that. And maybe we should fight more funding from the state in order to do this. Maybe the county should do that. That particular effort is being dusted off now. And we are cooperating with the Bronx River Alliance, who has the contract to update that watershed municipal plan. And the watershed extends into more than 13 different communities. It goes further northeast and to the north. So lots and lots of people are becoming involved in that. Anyway, when we do our two-hour programs on Sunday, I advertise on Meetup, and I have a list of probably 300 people who have been in program. And I basically brag that I can make you an expert in this activity in 20 minutes. It's that simple. You see, first you need to go out and you need to identify what the problem plants are. And we mainly deal with Oriental bittersweet and porcelain berry. Two vines that will kill trees. One that chokes them to death, the other one that steals the sunlight so that it can't photosynthesize. As Brent mentioned before, these plants came from somewhere else, okay? And not from around here. And they don't have any natural enemies. Aside from that, deer don't eat them. If we can put a spice on, get the deer to eat them, we'd be way ahead of the game. So you identify, then we use lopping shears to cut these things, right? For really, really big ones, we use a handsaw. We work very, very closely, and we have the permission of the Westchester County Department of Parks, Recreation, and Conservation, who owns that particular piece of land, to go in there and do this. So they're our main partner. We have in the past couple of years, in addition to planting in areas where we save trees and remove other invasives, because there are others that we deal with. We started to plant. Yeah, I'm sorry, I lost my train of thought. But once again, a lot of it is education. People need to know about this stuff. You drive up and down the parkways in Westchester, and there's a term that we use called plant blindness. In the summer, everything looks green, and you say, oh my God, this is glorious. But if you get up close, you'll see that most of what you're seeing is not good. And eventually, if we don't save these trees, we're going to lose them all. So question is, how do you replace a 100-year-old tree? I don't know. I'm not sure. We worked with the county to replace some oak trees at the county center. When the pandemic hit, they had to close down the county center, basically turn it into an emergency hospital, and they set up a big fence in the parking lot just south of the county center. And they had to remove all those historic oak trees that had been there for almost 100 years. Each one dedicated to a soldier that died in either World War I or the Spanish-American War. And there were, 2-3 dozen of them. Anyway, the county wanted to replant, and the trees are in now. They wanted to plant what is common now. You don't plant one species of anything anymore when you're doing a restoration project, because what if a blight comes through and wipes them all out? So they wanted to plant this, that, the other thing, different species of trees. We argued and we went back to our historic preservation roots and did some work with Westchester County Historical Society to say, no. There's a reason why those were oak trees. Because an oak tree is the strongest of all trees and they last for over 100 years. There's significance to this. So anyway, the compromise was that they will plant oaks, but they're planting 5 or 6 different varieties, right? And the reason I bring that up is because the oak trees that were there, you couldn't put your arms around, they were so big. And what did we replace them with? We replaced them with a tree that's about this big. No bigger than the girth of my leg. So in answer to the question, how do you replace a 100-year-old tree? You replace it with a much smaller tree. I'm also a master gardener volunteer. They unleashed me after I retired. I jumped into all sorts of different things. The Master Gardener Volunteer Program at Cornell Cooperative Extension does a lecture series. The first lecture, which is coming up in January, is a 1-hour program by Rick Harper, who used to work at Cooperative Extension in Westchester, and now is an arborist professor at the University of Amherst in Massachusetts. Anyway, he's going to run the program, and the title is "How Are Trees Beneficial?" So I can't wait to hear it from an expert, because we all know that they turn carbon monoxide into dioxide into oxygen, and they absorb water, et cetera, et cetera. They add to the value of your property tremendously. Anyway, in a nutshell, we save trees. And if we don't do something about it, we're going to lose all those trees. And basically, we're going to replace them with sticks with roots. So what can we do? New York State has done a couple of things. They passed a law that went into effect about 6 years ago about invasives that were prohibited from being sold. Okay. And that came a couple of years after they started the PRISMs, funding the PRISMs, as Brent mentioned before, and there were 8 of them in New York. But there ought to be a law that says that New York State DOT and DEC ought to make removing invasives a priority. It's been done in other countries. There's a story about Australia where they concentrated for a number of years on certain invasives, and they eradicated them because they made it a priority. So what can we do? We can lobby our representatives and tell them there ought to be a law. Because I got to tell you, we work on the Bronx River, and normally, as I began to mention before, and I'm sorry, I'm all over the place. We used to start in Mount Vernon and Yonkers and hit about 15 different areas all the way up to Kensico on the Bronx River. A couple of years ago, we realized that we need to focus. So what we did was we started in North White Plains at Fisher Lane, and we worked along the Bronx River pathway, and we went all the way. We went 2 exits. We worked there all winter, and we saved over 200 trees. All right. Last year, we worked at around Crestwood Lake, down in the Tuckahoe Crestwood area, and I stopped counting at 400 trees. All right. So it's possible to do, but the effort needs to be there, and it can't just be with volunteers. The volunteers, we'd be lost without the volunteers. But the state needs to make it a priority to pass a law that The people that are getting paid to maintain these minimally managed areas need to do more than what they're doing now, more than plowing the snow, more than fixing the guide rail when there's an accident, more than fixing the lights, more than repaving the roads. They ought to hire some gardeners. All right, I'm gonna leave the rest for Andrew. Yeah, thank you for listening. I know I was all over the map, but I always am.
All right. Get loaded up here. So I'll introduce myself real quick. My name is Andrew Middlebrook. I work for the Salem Open Land Foundation. We're a not-for-profit land trust based out of Salem, New York. You go to the next slide, please. So just brief who we are, as I just said, we're a not-for-profit land trust. We've been in North Salem since 1974. We're a committed group to preserving basically the natural beauty of North Salem and protecting the open space for native plants and wildlife. We do this through acquisitions of what we call fee properties, so land that we actually own as a land trust, and then conservation easements. NSOLF, you see that? It means North Salem Open Land Foundation. You can call it NSOL, you can call it whatever you want. I get it all the time. So anyway, we own 25 parcels of land, again, fee properties that we actually own and maintain through a variety of programs. A total of 850 acres in a town of 40,000 acres. So we're maintaining quite a bit of land out there. We also hold an additional 547 acres in conservation easements, and those are through private properties, like it could be an easement on your property. Okay. All these parcels of land, these 1,400 acres, they're going to remain preserved and undeveloped in perpetuity. RP properties also have backup easements on them. Should we dissolve tomorrow, the land will remain as it is in our absence. And hopefully someone puts a plaque in our name. Most of this land is accessible to the public through passive recreation. Not all of it, but I'd say about half of it is. We do have trails out there as well. Okay. And as you can see, we have a variety of different landscapes: meadows, hayfields, forests, wetlands, watercourses, and some historic sites. So each one of those properties requires a different type of management. Okay, there's a different approach, and I will get into that later on here. Many, if not all, of these locations do reside within the Croton watershed. So that includes New York City watershed plans. So that leaves New York City. And Eastern Westchester Biotic Corridor, which is a unique, we'll call it chunk of land, that incorporates part of Connecticut and New York on the eastern side of Westchester County. Okay, next slide. Here is a map of our holdings. So the dark green are our parcel lands. So up here, just to give you an example, I'm just going to go through it quick. Yeah. This is the northeastern portion of Westchester County. This is actually our headquarters. So we are focused right there in the tip. So everything that comes south eventually has to go through us and heads north. We have a variety of parcels throughout North Salem. Our easement lands are a little harder to see. They're the hash marked ones throughout the map here as well. We do have some property down here in Lewisboro, and we do have an easement here with Westchester Land Trust as well under Old Church Lane Preserve. Go to the next slide. These are just some of our featured preserves. These are by no means all of them. It seems like everybody and their brother knows Baxter Preserve. If you've ever walked there, please come back again. Here's our hayfield on here. It's a historic hayfield. It does host some pretty unique species, including the bobolink, which is a relatively rare migratory bird. Comes up from South America every year, so we're very fortunate for that. We like to think that our conservation efforts there over the past almost 50 years have made a big difference in providing valuable habitat to a rare bird, shall we say. That's just a photo of our wild preserve. We're very lucky that was left to us by a former board member, but she passed away. She not only left us a beautiful new headquarters, which got us out of a very small office space above a pizza place and dumped us on 88 acres of pristine land up that northwest corner of Westchester County. So we're incredibly grateful to Paul Weil giving that to us. Next slide, please. So here's just based on the Lower Hudson PRISM, thank you. What we call our peer species, okay? Instead of just saying here 1 through 5, I base it on different terms. So these are species, invasive species specifically throughout our preserves that we are in some form of management. You can see that can be treatment, eradication, research, or experimental control efforts. These are most of what I deal with on our preserves. Our widespread species are a lot of what you will likely see on your property, on a walk, driving along the roads. You've got your heavy hitters like the barberry, bittersweet, like a lot of these folks have talked about here tonight. Some of the more established species over here, Hemlock woolly delicate, we have actually retreated our old growth hemlock stands on 2 of our preserves this past year. They were up for retreatment. We worked with a Lower Hudson PRISM partner by the name of Trillium Inc., owned by Tom Lewis. So we're very fortunate for that. Emerald ash borer, we all became very quickly familiar with over the past couple of years as our ash trees were practically decimated. Porcelain berry, I'm grateful it's not too widespread. It's mainly concentrated on one of our preserves. And then some of these others we've worked with throughout the past couple of years to just, these things show up overnight. Like Brent said, it's not just a nice cultivar you may have on your property right now. It's spread by wildlife. And things like a mile a minute spreads very quickly, seemingly a mile a minute. We've been working with that quite a bit the past couple of years. Lesser celandine is another one that I have focused quite a bit of efforts on along the Titticus River, which feeds the Titticus Reservoir. It was a nice walk I had with my former supervisor a few years ago doing a spring ephemeral wildflower walk, and said, "What is this beautiful flower?" My heart just about sank. And sure enough, I was my suspicions came true. So thus started an invasive species management program. Some of the threat species we've heard a lot about this past year, especially is the spotted lanternfly, which has been a valiant effort in terms of communication through New York State DEC, news broadcasts, Lower Hudson PRISM. All of us here in this room have worked diligently to spread information as best as possible about the spotted lanternfly. Emergent species that I'm also immensely grateful to be a Lower Hudson PRISM member because of is chocolate vine. The Lower Hudson PRISM does have what we refer to as an invasive strike force. They have a terrestrial division and an aquatics division. I happen to be sitting, it actually might have been here, during a PRISM meeting. And one of the folks from Vassar College was talking about chocolate vine. All of a sudden, lights went off, and I said, "That's what that is." So I went out, identified it in the field, and sure enough, I sent an email to the strike force, and they were there that summer. As now, for the past 2 years, helped us to manage that on our Halmy, Hurst, Mead, O'Donoghue Preserve, which we just call Halmy because it's a lot easier. I think we may very likely at this point this year be just in sort of a monitor stage. They did such a good job. I'm looking more for outbreaks over the next couple of years. Spot treat, and then might actually be the first species we eradicate, which would be really a huge success. Some of the forest pests you'll see are also on some of the other species here, but beech leaf disease has been something that I know a lot of us in PRISM have been focusing on here over the past couple of years because besides maybe the emerald ash borer, I don't think I've ever seen something move as quickly as beech leaf disease has. It was kind of mind-boggling, honestly. I first spotted it on our most southern preserve off 138 in North Salem in, I want to say it was 2020. And now 2 years later, it has moved throughout all of our preserves, east to west, north to south, and just like in record time. I have seen stands that last year were beautiful beach stands. I even have written out some of our base management reports of new properties that we've acquired. I remember writing down how amazing the beach stand was. This year, that beach stand, it's not long for the world, put it that way. And that happened in 2 years. So definitely, it's hard to manage for something that you can't see. You know what I'm saying? These things move quick. Not everything does, but some of them do. So next slide. Here's just some photos of some invaded landscapes. Here is a patch of mile a minute vine I found at our Baxter Preserve that looks worse than it is. It's actually relatively manageable in terms of mile a minute. It's under some aggressive management. We'll hope for the best. Here is probably a spring picture of the chocolate vine at our Alamy Preserve. The lighting isn't great, but basically all of what you're seeing here is vines. You will see that it does still hold its leaves throughout winter. That sometimes can be a telltale sign of an invasive species. You see something that is still nice and bright with green leaves that is not native evergreen. Very early in the spring and late into the winter, almost all throughout the winter, there's probably a good chance it doesn't belong here. But that is one of the advantageous signs of these species is they get a head start, they hold on longer. As a lot of these guys have already said today, there's no natural predator here. There's no threat to them, so they kind of go unchecked. Right. Next slide. So some of the challenges of management, we've already sort of talked about a lot. As I said before, each landscape hosts a different type of species. So something you may see in a riparian or a wet area, you may not see in the center of a haven. Okay, so you kind of have to determine what species am I dealing with based on my location and the environment in which it grows. Each one of those species also requires a different form of management, which makes it a lot of fun. Some of these forms of management can be a variety of different approaches. I'll talk about some of them in the future here. Some of the other challenges, as I just said, are insects and pathogens are real hard to see and they're easy to miss. So when emerald ash borer happened, a lot of us didn't even realize it was happening until suddenly these trees were not leafing out and woodpeckers had started to hammer them for the larvae going inside. It was at that point where we started to quickly realize we had a massive problem and that it was already out of control. DEC did a lot about not moving firewood. Well, these things fly. So there's another challenge. Not moving firewood is definitely a great approach to this, but it's a multi-pronged approach. Sometimes just the magnitude of the invasion and the actual scale of the resources you may not have built. Some of us have more funds than others, where we're looking at an entire forest of barberry. That's something that, in terms of managing that versus an outbreak of mile a minute, for me, I'm going to focus my efforts into the new outbreak of mile a minute because it might be something that I can actually get under control with the resources that I have. That forest of barberry looks like a really nice long-term volunteer project. It's just because I have to be very careful about, where am I going to put my efforts to yield the best results. A lack of native biodiversity under an entire forest of barberry is another huge challenge to manage. Not saying that there aren't native seed in the seed stock of soil. They may still be there, just waiting for the right opportunity to finally get the life and things that they need to sprout forth and actually grow. But when they're constantly being suppressed by an invasive species, it's very difficult to kind of see the future of a management project, not knowing what's actually there. Finding the right resources. You can do a Google search, but you can just swim in the ocean forever and just get lost and overwhelmed. And as a private landowner, that can be discouraging, right? So you want to find the right resources, and that's about looking locally. Contact one of us. We're in your backyard, you know, and ideally we'll be able to at least guide you in the right direction. We may all have similar resources too. Obtaining proper permits, licensing, depending on where you're working, it's something to think about. Working in a wet riparian area, be very careful. There's wetland codes for a reason. Okay, so just again, do your research and just call and ask. Never hurts to ask, right? Sometimes the longevity and the feasibility of management seems overwhelming as well. If you're staring out at that forest fire area in your property, you have to understand that you're in for the long haul. You know, this is not going to be just a turnkey type of thing. You're in for a long-term management process, but that's part of it, okay? And again, the ability for successful restoration is key. If you're pulling something out, you're going to want to replace it with some sort of a native species from our region, okay? A local ecotype, if you will, all right? You can bring in a plant that is native, but if it's grown in Michigan, it's used to the conditions in Michigan. It's not necessarily used to the conditions that we have here, and that's something to consider. But there are more native plant carriers around than one would think. And Linda put together, I think we all put together quite a list of native landscape suppliers that I ever realized was around just a couple of years ago, and that was through the Lower Hudson PRISM. So reach out if you're curious, okay? And again, there's plenty of benefits to management. You're going to learn about your local ecosystems, your native and invasive species. Are you going to educate yourself? These are ways of positively engaging with the land, okay? Any one of us can get Roundup poison here. That's not a great way to positively engage with your landscape, okay? When you start to get down working with it on a hands-on level, you're going to learn a lot about not just where the plant grows, what else is living there? What else are you impacting by removing these plants and putting something new in their place, okay? Increasing biodiversity comes with that. Again, educating yourself. You're going to learn a lot about local, state, and national conservation efforts, which are happening, as you can see, on a small scale and a large scale. We're just a small local land trust. Lower Hudson PRISM, New York, New Jersey Trail Conference, it's huge. We're all in different capacities. You know, we all work in small, big settings, but overall, the mission is the same, I think. How cool then, you know, is it to watch your landscape come back to life again? When I took on our property in Danbury, a number of years ago, it was not what it is today. I took over from a landowner for 15 years who cut everything to about, you know, half an inch height religiously, nonstop, never planted anything. They ripped everything out. It was just thatch by the time I came in, and have slowly worked to restore native landscape. And the first time I planted milkweed, by the end of the summer, there were monarch caterpillars on my property. And I thought, this is a huge win. It made me think of Field of Dreams. Planted, they will come. They did. And that was hugely successful. I figured if I could bring a monarch to this seemingly dead environment, what else can I do? So that was hugely just beneficial to my own personal hope. And you know, through all of these efforts, you know, you may volunteer with somebody like Bob or the Westchester Parks Foundation and learn so much about like giving your time to a valuable cause and teaching future generations about why it's important. You know, give your volunteer time. You never know what will come of it. Anyway, next slide. So I always like to try to say manage for success. Even if you don't really know what you're doing, at least try. Here's just some basic steps to management, okay? This is, let's just say you're going out for you know, a walk in your backyard, and you say, I want to get to know what else is out here. You know, am I seeing all the same plants? Maybe you are seeing all the same plants and you're not sure what they are. Observe what they are. That's your basic observation. Okay. Document finding. Just snap some pictures. Snap it in a variety of different seasons so you can see it in different settings. How does this plant change? Okay. So you can identify it off season too. If you can identify it, there's lots of apps and books still exist for identifying native plants versus invasive species. Is this a native or not? Based on that, is management needed? Okay, you may actually just have a lot of Christmas fern, and that's great too. It's a native species, wonderful. Now, it might not be a native species. It could be an invasive species. Once you ID it, you may find out if management is needed based on what you're doing. Should I report this? You know, maybe you're finding lots of spotted lanternfly and you thought it was something else like just a really big ladybug. Ladybugs aren't that big. So in the case that you're finding spotted lanternfly over your backyard, please report it. And then is this something I can do myself or do I need to call a professional? Again, based on what you're reading, that's sort of up to you. You may be really a gung-ho and wanting to get out there and do it. Go for it. If not, you still call a professional, and there are groups out there who can work with you and help you to achieve your long-term goal. From there, you can determine your best management practices, okay, based on your research. What are you finding that keeps coming up again, okay? It's probably the best way to move forward. And create a management plan. This could be as lofty or as minimal as you want it to be. We have all created management plans based on different properties and different species that we're this is where you get into the long term. Management plan isn't just a year, it's 5 years, it's 10 years down the line, but it's based on your goals and what you want to achieve with this species. How do you want to get rid of it entirely? You know, what are your means of doing so? This is where you kind of create that parameter so you have something to focus on for years to come. Okay, you can see how successful you were as well. Getting out doing your field work, okay, monitor, manage again, and then document at intervals and determine how well you did based on that management plan. This is what pretty much all land managers use when it comes to addressing invasive species. That could be on a wide scale, or just a small outbreak that you're down here in say, one of our reserves. I'm going to do the same thing, okay? And your management methods. Manual can take lots of different approaches. You could use the wonderful weed wrench, or you could use your own hands. The weed wrench is easier. Manual comes in terms of sometimes even when, you know, say this right out the bat to the local landowner, but firearm is an option in terms of manual. There's lots of different types of approaches when it comes to manual removal of invasive species, okay? Mechanical, you're using some sort of piece of machinery, maybe a brush hog to take out a large swath of something that's overgrowing, say a hayfield, okay? That's just cutting it at base level though. The roots are still there. There still may be a manual aspect of that in the end. Chemical, this is something where you may want to speak to a professional first. Again, in terms of how you're utilizing these things. We've all heard a lot about Roundup the past couple of years. Take that stuff very seriously, okay? It doesn't just disappear when it hits the ground. It stays there. It goes into the water sources. It goes into the plants and animals that live there, which also affect us too. You also have biological controls. These are things in terms of, say, mile a minute, okay? There is a type of weevil that has been approved through many, many years of research through professionals that have said this, like, say, going back to the monarch butterfly, or even the caterpillar feeds on milkweed alone, okay? In terms of mile a minute, this weevil feeds on mile a minute alone. If it ever exhausts its food source in that site, it's not going to suddenly just start feeding on a maple tree. It's not how these things work. They evolve to coexist together. They depend on each other. And one is gone, the other goes with it. So these are approved biological controls that take decades of research before they release them into the environment. Something that the local landowner could probably use in terms of biological control would be things like, you see this at garden center sometimes, you see ladybugs or praying mantis infecta. They're for control of aphids in your garden or other pest insects as well. Okay, next slide, please. Oh, actually, go back if you don't mind. And again, this is just some documentation of the before and after treatment of lesser celandine. Okay, so here's our patch before, here's our patch after. So you can see just how important it is to document what it is that you're working on and your control efforts, how they work over time, success of them. Thank you. Here's some restoration sites. So this is our Baxter Reserve, June 2020. That was a fun time to get volunteers. October, people were far more inclined to actually want to come out. I think they had all been shut-ins at that point. So we had far more people for these plantings. This was through the New York State EC Trees for Tribs grant program. We were very fortunate enough to work with them now on 3, 4, 5 different restoration sites. Okay, 2 at our Baxter Reserve, 1 at Duran, at our Duran Reserve, and then 2, 3, and then we did another 2 at our wild headquarters, probably 1 more slated for this upcoming spring. We probably have at this point close to about 300 native trees and shrubs that have been planted in restored areas along riparian zones, so water courses, things of the like. All right. So these green tubes, there's actually things growing in there. They're just to protect the plants from deer browse and rabbits and things like that. Next slide. And this is in no way exhaustive of groups that we work with. We are incredibly fortunate to get the chance to work with all these individuals. But there's so many more local. These are just a few that, you could call today if you live in Lower Westchester. Any one of them is going to give you an answer to a lot of things that we're talking about right here. Town of North Salem, we're in North Salem. I deal with them a lot. We have worked with them in even rewriting their wetlands code over the past couple of years, which has been hugely beneficial to working with the town and growing that partnership. Watershed Agricultural Council, we worked with them even on some of our trees for trip sites. Hudson Lusitanic is another regional partnership, including the Lower Hudson PRISM. You'll see right up here, the New York State DEC, which we call, even if we're sure of the answer, we call them anyway, because it's better to make sure that you are covered in what you're about to do. Trillium Invasive Species Management, they do more than I could ever do in terms of treating and using approved treatment sources for different types of invasive species. We worked with them on 2 of our preserves over the past year to treat our old growth hemlocks and save them from hemlock delta. Okay. Westchester Parks. I was fortunate enough to work with Westchester Parks for a number of years as well. We do have some of our preserves that abut parkland, so we talk frequently. It also helps that one of the folks who runs that specific preserve was my former supervisor. Teatown, we're here. You know why you're here. And of course, Westchester Land Trust as well. So next slide, please. And here's just some ways to engage. A lot of what we do in North Salem is community engagement. We're a small community. So the more we get to engage our community, the more we grow our membership base, but also the more I can educate folks in the community about what's going on. What are we facing within town? Okay. How can we educate each other? How can we get more volunteers? How do we grow our volunteer land steward program, which is huge for me? They've all spoken about the importance of volunteers. We literally cannot do it without a dedicated group of volunteers. When I came on board, we had a great land steward staff already. We actually added additional 8 people this past year alone. I think we're up about 28 land stewards total, which is wonderful. Without without them out there, I physically can't go visit every preserve every day of the week. I wish I could, but it's not that easy. So they're my eyes and ears when they're out there. The recent windstorm, I mean, I knew I was laying in bed that night sweating, thinking about it. The next morning I had emails and calls that they had recorded everything that was down, and I appreciate that so much. I cannot do it without the volunteers. But just more ways to engage. Just come to some events just like this. Come to the local hikes that folks are hosting. There's lots of workshops that we all offer to engage the community, not just in invasive species, but all sorts of different types of, restoration, what you can do on your own property as well, okay? Engage with our web series, use different types of apps. These are free apps. IMAP Invasives helps the New York State DEC track invasive species spread throughout New York State. So it's almost like our volunteer land steward program. That's like kind of what I envision, like something like IMAP Invasives. It's just people all throughout the state saying, hey, I saw this here. It's a giant mapping program. It's incredible. When it works out, you see the amount of little dots on one map. And you go, oh, that's a lot of invasive species. But you know what? It's being mapped. And that is what's key, right? So if you don't know where it is, how do you react? iNaturalist is a fantastic tool. Again, it's a free tool. You can use it to identify everything from mushrooms to birds, if they stay still long enough, to plants, to anything you can imagine out there. And it's just a great way to say, is this a native? Is this an invasive? And maybe that's when your management program starts in your own property, right? Become a volunteer land and trail steward. We've already spoken leagues about that. Join a local pollinator pathway. This has been actually a huge program for us. We created, in a sense, the North Salem pollinator pathway. It's me. If you call, you'll get paid. And what we have really encouraged for that program is, you get a lot of questions. Say, hey, how about I just come out to you? Okay, so I'll go out to a property and I'll just bring me around. I'll just absorb it. I'll absorb it all, take my notes, and then I'll give them based on what I saw, based on their information, what their goals are. Here's where you're at. Most people actually qualify for the pollinator pathway, and they're like, oh, it's going to be years before I get on there. No, you'd be surprised that you actually have there already. How you grow on that is how the pathway goes to. You can add a lot, but you may not have to. You may have more species, native species there than you actually recognize to begin with. But our native pollinators in our time of crisis, as if anything else isn't at this point, but the pollinator pathway, that's an amazing way. Like I said, planting that one milkweed on my property, just that was huge, So it's small steps to a big lofty goal in the end. Okay. Internships, we're all looking for interns. You got kids and they're interested in this stuff, please send them our way. They will be educated and they will walk away with valuable information that may also, I always like to think, steer them into a direction when they head into college and things like that in the future. You never know where it's going to start. I have a criminal justice degree, okay? I'm not utilizing that right now. Like Adam, I went back to the things that I love. I'm here for a reason, because I had a teacher in high school who was the first person that ever spoke to me about invasive species, and it was purple loosestrife when I was part of a marine biology program. And that stuck in my mind so much that I came back to what I really cared a lot about. All right. We started our summer youth corps in 2020. Again, what a fun time to start a program and people together. But you know what? It was hugely successful because we were outside, we were spread out, and we were still enjoying the world as much as we could, as spread apart as we could be, and we had a great summer, and it's grown since then. And it's just a great way to get kids involved. Site visits with a professional, please feel free to call and just engage with our platforms and our resources. Like I said before, you don't have to swim in the Google mess of, there's too much information. Look for your regional conservation organizations. You will likely be able to hear you in that direction. Next slide, please. and contact us today. There's my information. Shoot me a call, shoot me an email. You can visit our website right here. If your camera will zoom in far enough on that QR code, it does work. I tried it earlier. So please do reach out. We're always in the office, you know, except for Saturdays and Sundays. But shoot us an email, give us a call. We're happy to help. Thank you.
So question. Yes.
So one of your preserves that had sort of like, really, you officially call it that up, but what is your remote frequency to maintain that? What is your concern relative to not like what shrub, you know, progressions? I'm not talking necessarily native, non-native, I'm just talking about maintaining a certain.
Sure. So the hayfield, is truly hayfield, but that specific one is our management plan is based on where the birds leave. So, and the past couple of years they've been hanging in a little bit longer, but they've come a bit later too. So our hay guys like, you know, I really want to get a good cutting. I'm like, sorry, the birds are here, and it's dependent upon the birds. So that site specifically is based on when the species fledges and they take off. And when they go overnight, they're gone. Some of our other meadows we do in series of threes, right? So maybe we'll cut the first, starting from the south, cut the first 2/3 throughout the year and leave 1/3 in the back. We'll leave that for habitat for overwintering insects and things like that. And then we'll shift that mowing pattern throughout the years and slowly just catching up to itself, you know, just so we're always leaving some sort of habitat, not mowing it completely down. There's some others, like the Baxter Preserve, we will hay, traditionally, looking at this reverse. So the northern sections of preserve throughout the summer, but we will leave there's several acres in the very far south. We leave that specifically again for late season pollinators to go for winter insects. And then when the right time arises, which is always a very interesting window between the very hard freezes, things starting to thaw, it's when we kind of have to strategically think about, okay, we have to get the equipment in there now before we lose that opportunity based on the viability of the land to hold some of that machinery, because we're talking, you know, several tons worth of equipment in terms of a tractor and a very, very, very large brush hog. When it starts to thaw, it creates an ungodly mess out there. So we have to be very careful about, you know, it's always sort of a fine line. It's never always the same every year, but we do our best to always make sure that we're leaving some habitat on any one of these hay fields or these meadows behind for something that is going to utilize.
I have a question for Brent. Is it true that the berries, for example, from the winged euonymus that the birds eat, just don't have the same nutritional value? The fact that they eat.
Yeah, so typically a lot of the invasive berries, you think like, oh, well, they're eating them, so it's providing some sustenance. But typically, you know, they're very high, very sugary, like really high sugar content, which you would think would be good because I don't know, it's like sugar tastes good or whatever. But during that time, if you're seeing the red berries late in the season, they don't eat sugar. Like they want to like winter and provide some fat. And so when you're looking at things like poison ivy berries and some of the native berries, they're really high in fat content. And so it's the native berries that they really need. And some of these invasive berries just aren't providing that sustenance to provide them to get over the winter and through the winter. So yes, it is a food resource, but it's not really giving them the type of sustenance that they need to overwinter.
Yeah, I've always, if I can add to that, I've always equated it to like, you can survive on McDonald's every day, right?
Right.
But you're not going to be very healthy, right? Yeah, I've always sort of seen them that way, right? And there's been studies where like the cedar wax that depend on certain types of berries, when they start to eat invasive berries as their main food source, when things begin to disappear, that classic red patch you see on their wings, that's like one of the distinguishing factors, begin to actually change color based on that. So you start to see even like, you know, a biological change in terms of what's being consumed and how the animals start to display even its breeding plumages and things like that.
My question for you, I think it's your first slide, it's like the mission statement, was twofold. One was to preserve properties, and the other was also be preserving properties, but try to limit development. So there's a two-part question. How do you identify, other than properties that are donated, how do you identify the properties to preserve for open space, and where's the money coming from? Who's purchasing them? I mean, I've been trying to get my town, and I can't, to do some things, and yeah, and how do we try to limit development?
We're a member-based organization, so we depend upon our membership to do things like that. But we have worked through various grants and with some other professionals who have identified key properties. Actually, this happened here recently. Key properties in town based on conservation values, and it's a multi-tier approach of what is it? Is it soil types? Is it agricultural soil? Is it climate resilient locations? And we've kind of keyed in on now specific properties in North Salem alone that, you know, okay, these would be ideal, and it's just it's a fine line. It's a passive approach, but sort of kind of aggressive when you start to like learn. And it's a small town, so you kind of hear rumblings here and there. So we just try to be a resource to landowners like that and just approach them and say, hey, you know, your property is unique for XYZ different reasons. It may not always be that we can take on another fee property, but a conservation easement is just as equally important. So it's a fine approach. It's working with the town as well, which we actually did, the town of North Salem and their Conservation Advisory Council to sort of, you know, where are the key properties in town? How can we sort of limit, you know, development in terms of what we're seeing out? You know, is this a critical habitat? If it is, you know, this is something that we relate to the town of North Salem quickly because you know, developer could come in, and if they don't have that information leading up to it, you know, things move really quickly. And before you know it, you've got a valuable wetlands being bulldozed into a 15-house, you know, development.
That's a very, very good question you asked. If you contact anyone, we'd be happy to spend a lot of time. But I know there's other people in the audience who spend time with you as well. One of which would be Nick. Had a question?
Yes. So other than the PRISM, or maybe it's under PRISM, do you guys and people like you get together in Westchester County to talk about these issues and share, you know, what's going on and whatever?
I'll defer to these guys on that. Yeah,
Yeah, I mean,
the answer is yes, but
Yeah, I mean, we do working groups together on different topics throughout the year to discuss, and lots of these organizations will do a Zoom call and talk about these different problems and solutions and what we're doing, you know, through the process. So that again is also really valuable. I mean, to me personally, I've learned so much from my colleagues, and that just will go back to the people that I work with. But yeah,
the PRISM is just sort of like it's an organizing structure for be like, this is what I want to talk about this year, and this is what I'm interested in, or this is what we're seeing in our region. And then it provides a platform for like organizations to get together and like share ideas and be like, okay, what's our strategy here? So, and then it kind of, then you start making relationships, and then they start contacting each other anyway, you know?
So would you recommend for local groups, whether they're CACs or other environmental groups, committees, other methodologies or nonprofits. Would you recommend joining PRISM and, to become part of those discussions?
Personally, I think so. Everyone's welcome to come to meetings and stuff, but like I think a lot of the good work happens in the working group. So I think becoming a member is important because you're tapped into like what they're actually talking about and then what the solutions are that we're coming up with, trying. Sometimes it's experimental. Like this is like beach leaf disease. It's still like a mystery. They don't even know what's actually causing it. They think it's a nematode worm, but like until we really get to the details of like what exactly the cause is, we've tried a couple different management approaches, stuff like that. So it's more like cutting edge of what's been tried. So you just don't do the same thing that didn't work for somebody else. So I highly recommend that because it'll save you a lot of time. I think that I've had people that have come join us been like, man, I wish this was so dumb. I didn't join before because I've been doing this thing for like 2 years now. And, by joining this group or whatever, I wouldn't have gone that route knowing that like they tried that before, it didn't work out. And it's not like a huge commitment. It's not like a financial thing. You attend a few meetings a year and you can be as involved as you want or not. It's kind of what do you want to get out of it? What's your goal? It's not like I don't know. It's not like I'm not putting on a sales pitch here. It's really up to you, But I think it's just a great way to connect. I looked up the berry information, like a lot of the things like the native viburnums and stuff, and bayberry, talking about like 30 to 50% fat content, and some of the other like multiflora rose, your Lonoceras and stuff, and burning bush, you're like 1-2% fat content. And it's like our native berries in the summertime, you want carbohydrates, right? But in the winter, you don't want that. So, and as you'll see, it's red berry time now for invasive. So.
Yeah, and it's that way with the Oriental bittersweet, which are the red berries with the orange covering on them. Apparently, nutrition-wise, it's mostly sugar, not fat. And what happens is the birds eat even more of them. And what they're doing at that point is, with each berry that they eat, they digest the fruit, they eliminate the seed. So, one of the ways that it spreads, if the seeds aren't falling off the plant itself, the birds dropping them wherever they do their business, fence lines, power lines, the edge of the forest. Yeah.
So, you're part of the Environmental Advisory Council of Teatown, and we have a lakes area that I've been involved with for the last 12 years. And during that period, I lived in the area for 23 years, and when I came, I didn't see any invasive plants, but over the 23 years, that area is now probably 80%, 5% invasive. Lester Salem, the job, first one here. Everything on our list is flowing there. And the village has never had the budget to manage this. They don't have the know-how. And so whole swaths, acres and acres are now for those Lester Salem. And I just observed this, and I really don't know what to do, what to recommend, where to go. But I know they're not helping the animals. We have a lot of deer. That's another reason why.
Bob mentioned that before. Deer aren't eating it, so it makes matters worse, right?
They ate up all of the nature.
Right. Exactly. Right.
So that leads to a larger question. We're sitting here, right? 4 towns come together. So what if either or all together, Austin, Newcastle, or Town of Portland wanted to start a program? Tarrantine probably ought to. What were the first couple steps you could do? How would you go about it? There's a huge problem. Nobody really got organized to really tackle except you guys.
You need somebody to run it, number one.
Yeah.
They need to recruit volunteers, and you need a little bit of money. I mean, my group, if we have $10,000 in the bank, that's a lot. And we're very miserly with that money. We're entirely membership driven. So people send in $25, $50, $100, whatever they feel is affordable. You got to start small, and you got to be successful so that you don't get discouraged. And then you document that, and you say, this is what a handful of people were able to do successfully. And then the program grows.
We did, personally very design in a very small area. And if I go back, now it's not even a year later, it's totally different.
Yeah.
So everything we did was for naught. I don't want to tell my volunteers that because they would feel discouraged. So I don't even know really how to approach persevering. Maybe just go into the woods where there's the vines, not hovering in the sunshine, because in the sunshine it's just for the people that did.
I got this. The porcelain berry and bittersweet are the two main culprits. Bittersweet, pretty easy to control. I've been doing this since 2003, and if you cut it 2 years in a row, it's pretty much done. So think of it from this standpoint. As far as the porcelain berry, it likes to be cut, right? It comes back with a vengeance. But what you're doing, if you cut it at the right time, you're preventing those seeds from those fruits from maturing and developing into seeds. So it's kind of like birth control, number one. But with those particular vines, you got to get a licensed applicator to come in, and as you cut the vine, spread some herbicide on it. And you got it. In order to do it on public land or to do it on somebody else's property, you got to be licensed. It's scary what you could do by going to Home Depot and buying and applying on your property. And most people, well, some people will overdo it. Like somebody said before, I think Brent said before, Roundup, it doesn't go away as soon as you spray it. It stays in the ground. God forbid it gets into the water supply. So
It's against the law in most of your.
And like Bob said, timing is everything. Like it really is. You want to get it right before it's like getting ready to produce those seeds and stuff, so that you're like invested a lot of energy into the next generation, but not quite there yet. And then you knock it out. Then you take away the biomass, but you do have to knock it out with more targeted herbicide typically to really get it.
Yeah. There's a course being offered in January. I'm going to take the class and I'm going to take the test to become a licensed applicator, so that I could do this. And it's complicated to get the license, because you take the test and then you're certified to do a class 3A, and then for certain properties you need a 6A. The state does not make it easy, and there's a reason behind that. They want you to know what the hell you're doing. But then you got to work as an apprentice, and then you become a technician, and you got to work under somebody else's license, and then you become licensed. So it's kind of like becoming a master plumber. That's like a 6-year program where you join the union and you apprentice for a long time before you are actually a master plumber. It's that type of thing. So,
And the other thing is like be really strategic. You were saying you're not going to be able to tackle everything. So you want to tackle something that is like makes sense either from a conservation perspective, that it's a known critical habitat, or like there's a or endangered species in that area, like target there, or like historical significance in that region. Whether you're like trying to bring back a building that people like to visit, or there's something on that trail section. But and you talked about some of the decisions you make about like trail access and stuff, but trying to be like, all right, we're going to tackle this like multiflora rose infestation in this acres and acres. It's not going to you'll lose hope very quickly. So you want to start, as Bob said, start small and be very strategic, like something that I think you have to provide hope to people that it's like, it's very visual. Whatever the first project is, make it visual to be like, yes, we just uncovered this building, or like we uncovered this, like opened up this trail section that was like lost, but used to be a wonderful entryway into the system or something. You know, be really think long and hard about like something manageable that's gonna be like add some pop, and then you can go like more of the ecological route.
And take pictures,
Yeah.
before and after shots.
Oh, yeah.
Very important, like Andrew had before with the lesser salinity.
Yeah, they're very motivating when we show those to volunteers and they see what something looks like. And then after a group of volunteers work on it once or a couple of days, and they say, wow, and it hammers home the impact immediately. And I think one thing is, as far as timing and all that we look at least just for management this time of year, like Bob, the vines are very much easier to get to. So we just had a project at Cranberry yesterday where we removed a significant amount of bittersweet vine. And it was easy to get right up to them.
Yeah.
So when everything's not leafed out, you can cause a lot more damage in the same period of time.
Yeah.
So we do a lot of that type of work at this time of year.
That's true. Yeah, it's either like you either get it when the energy investment is went in and then you cut it back, or when it's just easy access. It depends on the work. Yeah.
I want to take our as a vine squad. I don't. There's a vine squad where you have a stewardship spot that you adopt with an updated trail. And so I know some of the one of the parts where farm, they cleared out, I wouldn't say they have, but they cleared out a whole section of the bases. I don't know if volunteers or grant, that's a place that they're used in.
This is news to me, I'm not sure what happens.
So I went on a walk with this conservation board, and she showed us the full area of the vine squad.
You're going to be part of the groundwork as well, and also we got a very active invasive removal and replanting plans. So we work with Paramount Club, work with PRISM, and then what we did was we also partnered with corporate green teams, and they like to do that stuff. Something like that. So they plastic bottles, they've got a green team that like to green wash their name, and they're out there clearing out bottles.
Yeah, they sponsor our Clean River project too, where we go into the Bronx River and we remove and catalog floating trash. And I love that they're taking accountability. Guess what? One of the number one things we pull out of the river, plastic bottles.
But they're there and they're willing to do it. And there are any corporation within the town, the village of Teatown, I'm sure, there's a green team. And if they don't, they do it. And they're
We actually work with some, and that's a great point. Thank you.
and Brentwood, I think you're really
That's great.
They're a great organization.
Just quickly, disposal, right? That's your only option. And you guys come out, you got this pile of biomass. Gonna get gone, or like a zombie button, you know.
It depends on the species. Some of them you want to bag, some of them you don't have to. If you put them somewhere where they'll safely decompose, then they're not going to be as much of a problem. Some of them, if you don't bag it, it's going to spread.
Right.
I feel like you need a pack of like trading cards, each species.
Yeah.
That's a great idea.
How to, how to prove it, how to.
I love that idea. Yeah.
Yeah, sifting through the lexicon or whatever, you do want, like the term you would put it on your slide is best management practices. They're called BMPs to get right to the root of it. But like, yeah, little quick cards on that would be really helpful. Like our website, we spent a lot of time kind of sifting through and creating best management practices for our region. So that's like a phrase, that's like the scientific phrase, I guess, that we use, best management practices. That's like I don't know, that's what to search for, but it's very specific to the species, but creating little cards.
Yeah, I mean, we had some of the green terns last year do these little, that's just a couple of the flyers that we handed out, like put onto one document, but they made these little cards of the frequent invasive species in the area and what to do about it. And so we'll have those at our tables, but I like that idea because having one for each specific species is.
We have that for like ID and stuff, but not necessarily.
I would love to do this when I go, well, I see how people properties, I'm saying, these people don't know what this is.
Yeah.
And I do something or maybe pay for something to be done. But you can't, I can't, write from a letter, I can put a tag on it.
Yeah.
Saying, I'm on the basis species.
Yeah,
Yeah.
that would be alarming, wouldn't it? Yeah, you walk around a property and tag, I'm an invasive species. You go, whoa.
Get rid of me. And
Yeah.
I mean, I think in some town, in Scarsdale, so the properties aren't huge. People would respond by saying, do you really want that bamboo?
Oh, yeah.
Oh, yeah, it grows fast and it's a great barrier. Yeah, love it.
Oh, yeah.
I'm getting a little worried about weather. And, this is the last question. Take it.
Can I just mention something?
Yes.
So, county has launched a website called Planting Westchester. And some people in the room, including Bob, are part of the team. There's one section called Combating Invasives where we, color vacuum, coal, the best practices, including, the PRISM's website, PRISM, and, some of the others. But it's just a website, right now, it's just a website, and we're hoping to operationalize it to more things like networking and, connecting people, convening people in Westchester County. But there are some identification, resources on it and management. It's, still worth the time.
Yes. So I want to thank Lauren, Brent, and Kevin, Bob, Andrew. I learned a lot tonight. I really appreciate it. Thank all of you for coming out. It's pretty lousy.
Yeah, happy and sorry you exist.
Yeah, right. Exactly.
Take some donuts with you.